All right, Gator fans, it is Wednesday night, and that means it is time for our preview show. The Florida Gators take on Georgia on Saturday in Jacksonville. We are going to preview the game on tonight's episode presented by BetUS. Also, stick around because Meldon Law is partnering with us to do a really big giveaway for the LSU game. I want you to know about that. Plus, I'm going to need you to stick around till the end because I have some pretty exciting news to share with you guys before the night's over. Also have a little bit of breaking news here. Trey Wilson is out for Saturday's game with a hip injury, and Jason Marshall Jr. is out for the rest of the season with a shoulder injury. This is according to On3's Zach Appleverdi. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. Normally, we talk with our special guest, and then we kind of talk about some of the keys to the game and little facts and figures about the matchup. We're going to do that first, and then we'll be joined by he'll be joining us in just a few minutes. So let's talk about this game, okay? And yes, Liam, injuries are killing us. Those are two big ones for sure. On Saturday, Florida and the number 2 Georgia Bulldogs are facing off for the 102nd time. This is the 92nd meeting in Jacksonville. Of course, it will be 3:30 now. This is going to be different for us because it is not on CBS, which is what we're used to, but it will be on ABC. The Bulldogs lead the series 55-44-2. They hold a 49-41-1 advantage in Jacksonville. The Gators are 22-12 versus the Bulldogs since 1990, though. But the last win came in 2020. Dan Mullen's Gators beat the Bulldogs 44-28. So this Week 10 matchup marks the third meeting between Billy Napier and Kirby Smart. Napier is 0-2 so far against Smart. We're going to see if he can turn that around at all. Georgia is currently a 16.5-point favorite over Florida, according to BetUS. So a really, really big spread, kind of disrespectful spread, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. Both of these teams are headed into this game with some serious positive momentum. The Gators played their most complete game of the season last week, right? They blew away Kentucky. It was 48-20 in Gainesville. The crowd was into it. It was just a hyped night. DJ Lagway, really strong showing against the Wildcats. He threw for 259 yards, was 7 of 14 passing, and he had 46 yards on the ground. He combined with Jaden Baugh to deliver what I would call a pretty potent 1-2 punch for the Gators. And Jaden Baugh, of course, having a red letter day, 5 touchdowns on the ground. He had 106 yards on 22 carries. It was the most complete game potentially of the entire Napier era. Absolutely of this season for sure, but I might go as far as to say the entire career of Napier as UF's head coach, which I feel like is kind of saying something. But we are not the only team that had a red letter day last Saturday. 2 weeks ago, Georgia beat Texas 30-15. And, Texas was that number 1 spot on the polls heading into that game. The Bulldogs raced out to a 23-0 halftime lead. They survived a, pretty decent rally from the Longhorns, and there were some tough breaks in there. And they got their first true program road win over a number 1 ranked team. It was incredibly impressive. I don't know that you watched that game and questioned who should be the number 1 team in the country. I think it is probably Georgia at this point. I know they lost to Alabama earlier in the season, but even that second half comeback against Alabama just showed why they are an elite team, right? And under Kirby Smart's watch, the Bulldogs have won 6 of the past 7 meetings with the Gators, including the last 3 in a row. So this is a big one. And the Gators are definitely underdogs, at least according to Vegas. And like I said a minute ago, I almost think disrespectfully so, right? So how do these two teams stack up statistically? I love kind of diving into these stats, and there were some kind of interesting things that I found. So for Florida total offense, they're averaging 413.3 yards per game. Georgia's averaging 427.9 yards per game. That's the difference between being the 49th total offense in the country, that's Florida, and the 41st total offense in the country. So honestly, not that different. We're talking about a 15-yard average difference between the two. So somewhat comparable, right? I have a feeling we get into red zone, appearances, there's a little bit of different outcomes there, but definitely interesting. Scoring offense, UF is averaging 30.9 points per game, and Georgia's averaging 33 points per game. So really only a 2-point difference there. Florida's tied for the 47th best scoring offense, and Georgia's sitting at 35th. So interesting also that those 2.1 points make such a huge difference there. Georgia's passing offense is more prolific than Florida's, but that's also take in mind factoring in Graham Mertz, who really wasn't throwing the ball a ton. It was more short dink and dunks. We've got Lagway who was throwing the long ball quite a lot. This stat may quickly change, but currently UF, their passing offense is 35th in the country and Georgia's is 13th. So where are the big difference between these two teams? Because it's really not offensively. And the answer is defensively. Florida is allowing 370.9 yards per game. That's good enough for 73rd in the country in total defense. Well, Georgia's only allowing 304 yards per game, which is good for 19th in the country. So that really is pretty much the biggest massive difference right there, the total defense. And as far as scoring defense, which is not something Florida's done well this year, UF is tied for 66th and Georgia is 13th. So they are doing a better job causing those mistakes, but then also capitalizing on them. I did think it was interesting, though, to kind of look at how they line up. I mentioned red zone. Well, red zone offense for Florida, we are 70th in the country. Georgia's 34th, so a lot better there. But honestly, when you look at the stats, I do think Florida will have the ability to hang with Georgia, right? I think that there are some really important players to watch this weekend, but the two that if you're going to pick a player from each team that you are going to pay attention to and that you think really could determine the outcome, I don't know how you pick anybody but DJ Lagway and Carson Beck. DJ Lagway has not been afraid to push the ball downfield. He takes chances. He has already passed for 1,024 yards on only 86 pass attempts. He's got 5 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. So we have talked on my channel for a really long time about the fact that Graham Mertz had a higher floor than DJ Lagway, but a much lower ceiling. And now, Graham is out for the rest of the year. This is DJ Lagway's team, right? He has a lower floor, but an exponentially higher ceiling. So what we're looking for here then is, are we going to see a performance like we did against Kentucky, where he completed 7 passes for 259 yards? Are we going to see any of those freshman mistakes? I think how DJ Lagway plays will largely determine the outcome of this game for Florida. And then the flip side of that is Carson Beck. Beck's had some growing pains this season, and, he's gotten some new weapons on offense. He lost a lot of guys last year. Lad McConkey and Brock Bowers went to the NFL. He had to kind of learn to work with these new weapons, and he's turned the ball over some, right? He is going to face what I think a lot of the national media thinks is still a weak defense for Florida, but I think they've improved a lot. And whether or not Beck can find his footing is going to go a long way in determining this outcome for Georgia. I'm going to see what some of y'all are saying in the comments before we move on here. Signetti, Matthew Walker says Signetti says he's not looking to make the move, but we'll see. At least make him say no. I think a lot of you are pretty interested in Signetti. He's definitely worth kicking the tires, I feel like. Q Lee says Georgia will take away the deep ball and force DJ to beat them with the short passing game. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the risk with Lagway, right? He's been really, really good at the deep ball, and he has been less effective in the short passing game. So can they work on that this bye week? Did they get some of that short up a little bit? Because I do think that could play a role in this as well. Matthew Walker says run defense will be a massive indicator of the outcome. I agree with that as well. I think this game is really so important for Coach Napier because I think that a win potentially saves his job, right? This is arguably the top team in the country. They're currently ranked number 2, but I don't know that there's a team that's played in 2 harder games than Alabama and Texas and had incredible showings in both of those. They're a battle-tested team, and if Napier were to figure out how to pull off a win here, I do think this is job saving. I think that if you beat Georgia, then the assumption is you beat Florida State. And at worst, at that point, you have 6 wins. I think that it's also a lot easier to see if you figure out a way to get one away from Georgia at the cocktail party. It's a lot easier to figure that you could pick one up of LSU or Ole Miss before you go to Tallahassee. And that really is a different kind of outcome on the Napier season than at that point. All right, guys, I think at this point we are going to go ahead and bring in our special guest. We have Graham Coffey of Dogs Central. Hey, Graham, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I'm so sorry that I am tardy for your show. I had some life trap things that came up, but I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
No worries. We're excited you're here. And, pivoting is something that we're very good at on this show. So not a problem. Okay. So Georgia's coming off the bye, just like UF, and they had that massive win against number 1 Texas. Would have to assume that they're still riding fairly high after that one, huh?
Yeah, it seems that way. I mean, in some ways, I think having the bye after that game helps because you had kind of a week to not enjoy that win, but for it to kind of wear off and to come down from that high. I think this is a dangerous spot for Georgia either way, just because that was the best game they played all season, particularly on defense, and that's a defense that prior to the Texas game I think has been kind of prone to some lapses and to some mental communication type stuff in the back end. So having the bye hopefully kind of resets things for them, I think, if you're inside the building. But it's not necessarily ideal to go into this game against a Florida team that I think is very much looking to define their season with a win over Georgia.
Okay, so we're going to talk about, get All right. Well, I'm not sure what happened, but I'm going to back up and ask you that question again. Thanks for sticking with us, guys.
Sorry.
So I've been asking this question of everybody for the last year on the channel, and I want to know, as an outsider, what's your perception of Napier?
I think Billy is. Oh, I think Billy's a good guy. First of all, like above all, I would say that everyone that I know in the coaching profession who has worked with him thinks highly of him and just likes him as a person. Thinks he's a good person to work with.
Yeah.
The outside view is that he's brought in to kind of build a recruiting infrastructure and to staff up Florida in the same way that Kirby Smart kind of staffed up Georgia 8-9 years ago now, and he's succeeded in terms of getting Florida to open their pocketbooks and hire all these polos basically, but it doesn't always feel like they're organized in the way of like guys, you know, like some of the mistakes that have happened on special teams and 12 men on the field and all that feels a lot less excusable when you have this big army of analysts. And I think from a recruiting standpoint, I think he's a good recruiter, but he's struggled with just the product on the field being hard to sell. And some of those mistakes, I think, make it harder to sell. My opinion on him from the jump has been that he shouldn't be calling plays. And I think that sometimes it looks like he is sort of struggling to manage being a play caller and an offensive coordinator and being a CEO of a multi-million-dollar organization, which is what an SEC football program is these days. So I think if you could let go of the play calling and bring someone in who has experience with talented dual threat guys like Lagway, that they could still kind of salvage this thing and maybe go on and have a really good kind of run at Florida. But that seems to be his biggest failure to this point from the jump. I thought when he got hired at Florida, if I was doing the hiring, one of my conditions of this job would be you're not going to be your own offensive coordinator, because Louisiana was successful while he was there, but relative to the talent gap that they kind of had created with the rest of the Sun Belt, their offense really wasn't that good. And I just don't know that, there's ever really been a market for him as a play caller going back to Arizona State, Clemson, places like that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on the play calling part there. All right, on to the game. You guys are going to be facing DJ Lagway. This is going to be his second start as, commander of this team. Obviously, he started the Stanford game when Mertz was hurt with a different injury, but this is different because now this is his team. Thoughts on playing him? There's, obviously not a ton of tape out there. He put on a show last week against Kentucky, though.
Yeah, well, so DJ, back in 2022, I remember talking to, other people in Georgia recruiting circles and just national recruiting circles and being like, I think this kid's the top quarterback in his cycle. And I still think that about DJ in the 2024 class. So I have a lot of respect for him both as a talent and as a person. I was out at Elite 11 his year in California and got to, kind of watch him and cover him. And I think he's really mature. I think he will be more ready for a moment like this than your average kind of freshman quarterback who's being thrown into the fire would be. I think he's kind of prepared for this his whole life. And I think he can kind of handle sort of the pressure and the responsibility because people have been talking about him for forever now. You look at where he is in his maturation as a quarterback, I think compared to like an Anthony Richardson, his tools and his mechanics as a thrower are much more suited to like short intermediate, kind of building out the ability to throw to all levels of the field. Now, have we seen him kind of put that on tape yet? Not entirely. So that's my big question for him coming into this game is just, can he hit enough of kind of the passes that keep you on schedule to stay on the field and let those explosive plays come? Because against Kentucky, it felt like things were sort of boom or bust for them offensively, and I think that like we know he can make the hero throw, but can he avoid turnovers and can he get enough kind of first downs to get there and have enough opportunities to make those big plays.
Let's go to the other side of the ball. UF has been pretty good against the run the last several weeks. Really good success against UCF and Tennessee, both teams that statistically are some of the best rushing offenses in the country. They pretty much shut Kentucky down. They're going to need to keep that up this week against a better rushing attack. How do you think Florida stacks up with Georgia there?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, like, because going back to last year in that game, I thought Princely, the guy who's at Ole Miss now, like, I thought if he hadn't been on the field in that game, that the score gets sideways a lot quicker because
Yeah.
he, was really kind of not just playing his own gaps well, but like jumping across the face of center and making plays in other guys' gaps. Georgia, I think, is gonna probably try to like play around with Des Watson some and make him get out of his stance and out of his spot and pursue things. Georgia's running game has been like really inconsistent to this point in the season, and the best it's looked was really the first half against Texas. Some of that can be excused by the fact that they were without two offensive line starters for most of the year. They'll have both those guys on Saturday, so it'll be interesting to see how having Tate Ratledge back at right guard with Jared Wilson back at center. I think the interior stuff will probably look as good as we've seen it look since the Clemson game. They've really become kind of like an outside, B gap and off tackle run team of late. So the question is, can they sort of vary things enough to not get too predictable? I think Florida like plays sound run defense, but I also think if you're looking at this game, what Georgia has on the offensive line should be able to open up some holes against Florida at points. Georgia has been kind of a bad success rate rush offense where, they have a lot of plays where they're getting stopped for like 2 yards or less, but they also have a lot of plays where, their good runs are really good and they're, 10, 12 yards and they're getting first down. So that will be the interesting part because like you have, I think, good linebackers at Florida. I think that's one of the strengths of kind of that defense with Shamar out there. And so can Georgia get to the second level and like block him up enough times to hit some plays and kind of be, threatening enough in the run game? Because this offense for Georgia is really skewed very pass heavy at times in recent weeks, and I don't think that's really how they want to live. I think they'd like to be more balanced, but teams have very much just said we're going to take away the run and kind of force a limited wide receiver group to get open in man-to-man coverage.
So let's go back to the other side of the ball. Georgia has given up more points this year, I think, than I expected that they would. Are you worried about their defense this weekend in Jacksonville, particularly the fact that Florida's offense is scoring a decent amount of points, these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at Florida's offense. Georgia's a good run defense, and they've been a good run defense pretty much whenever they've needed to all year. Their defensive tackles, I think, have quietly had maybe as good a year as any interior defensive line in the country, and they've really kind of controlled games and controlled offensive play calling by just anchoring really well and not being very movable in the middle of the field. So I think Georgia probably feels pretty good about defending Florida in the run game, particularly with Montrell kind of being, I don't know how healthy. With the pass game, like Lagway, it's the scramble part of things can cause Georgia problems and has caused Georgia problems, like dealing with quarterbacks who can, recognize man coverage and let a play develop and then just take off for 15 easy yards. That's always a Kirby Smart defense's bugaboo, really. And so it all comes down to me on how well can DJ at this phase in his career kind of recognize those situations and then manage them and take advantage of them. I don't know the answer to it. I think Georgia would probably say they feel good about how they match up with Florida's receivers with Eugene Wilson not playing.
Yeah.
But DJ is also good enough with his legs and kind of creates that, that you get an extra number in the run game with him. So
Yeah.
I'm very interested to see if Billy tries to just attack the edges of Georgia's defense. And we don't know how many snaps Mykel Williams will play in this game, but if he's not out there, I do think that Georgia has kind of shown that they'll have some lapses on setting edges. So I would expect Florida to test that with zone read and then outside runs out of the shotgun.
Talk to me about the ETN factor in this game. Obviously, I understand that in today's college football world, it is becoming more and more common to jump from one team to the other. But, I think it's still pretty interesting, at the very least, to go from Florida to Georgia, right? And that's kind of got to be a motivating factor for both sides, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, Trevor is a kid who
Oh, looks like we lost Graham. We should get him back momentarily, and then we'll ask him some more about ETN. But until he's back, we'll kind of continue on with the show. I want to give BetUS some love. You can go to BetUS and bet on the game right now, but BetUS has upped the game now. You get a 150% deposit bonus when you use the code YouTube150. Your second and third deposits are still a 125 deposit bonus. That's up to $2,000. UGA is currently a 3-score favorite right now. So if you like the Gators, or, you think that spread's a little ridiculous, go lay a little money on it. Appreciate BetUS for their support. So make sure you go check them out. We'll get Graham as soon as he gets back into us. But until he does, I want to talk to you guys about my keys to the game. Okay. The first one is, can DJ Lagway handle the pressure of this game? We're going to get right to that, but now we've got Graham back, so we'll talk about the keys to the game later, and we'll jump right back to where we were. Graham, tell me about the ETN factor.
I'm so sorry. I have no idea why. I've not done anything but sit here. I think that ETN, it's an interesting study in sort of this whole new dynamics because, I think it was a business decision. I don't think it was personal. I think he liked a lot of guys on the Florida sideline. I think a lot of the guys on the Florida side probably like him still, But they will not be friends for 3.5 hours in Jacksonville on Saturday, right? So I'm interested to see if that actually gives Florida a little bit of extra juice early in this game defensively. Like when they see a ball go to him, I expect them to swarm, and I expect them to want to get a hat on him. Can Georgia take advantage of that maybe with some play action stuff and, disguise some things well and kind of get a freebie explosive? Possibly. Like maybe Georgia can kind of use that against them depending on how hard they're biting early. But yeah, I'm interested to see it. I think it's a great storyline, but I think also in actuality, there's a lot of it where it's not that. I don't know that it's as good of a story as we want it to be, just because I don't really pick up on the type of bad blood that you would expect.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk big picture. What about UF worries you the most?
I think if you're Georgia, the thing about Florida that's probably got to worry you the most is Lagway. I don't. I think Florida's defense has played well as of late, but I don't know that what Georgia does is the best matchup for Florida's defense schematically, right? I think if Georgia executes at kind of a level that they've proven they can, that they should be able to have enough success on offense to win this game. What scares you if you're Georgia is that DJ Lagway comes out and shows that he is, that type of player, the type of player that we all think he can be and will be. And that's possible. Good offense always beats good defense is something that I'm very fond of saying. And he has the ability to make throws that other guys just don't have the ability to make. And you can be in perfect coverage and he can still beat you downfield. So I think that's the scare if you're Georgia, is that you kind of find yourself get into a situation where Florida's putting together some explosive plays that are leading to points, and then you continue to be somewhat turnover prone on offense, and that leads to more points, and all of a sudden you're heading to the fourth quarter and this game's 27-24, and then anything can happen.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to let you get out of here, but I just got a couple more. First of all, I saw on Twitter today there were, your tweets about potentially this, hatred for Kirby starting well before he was actually head coach of the Dogs.
Yeah.
I think this is a really interesting story, so I want you to tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I grew up as a Georgia fan, and in the '90s, and I grew up in the Spurrier era of dominance, right? Where Florida was just better than Georgia, and that was just an accepted fact of life. Quite frankly, like they were just better at football than Georgia, and it felt like Georgia could never beat them. Finally, in Kirby's senior year, actually, Georgia knocked off that number one Florida team in '97. But I think that like Spurrier carried his ire and hatred for Georgia even after he left Florida and went to South Carolina, and I think all of that really comes back to him in his Heisman season of 1966. They were undefeated. They wanted to have their first perfect season and first SEC championship in school history, and Georgia spoiled that in Jacksonville. They won 27-10, and at the end of that game with 1 second left, Vince Dooley called a run play for a touchdown and like twisted the knife. And so when Spurrier got the chance to poke Georgia, he did it, and he did it with a smile on his face, and that included in '95 when they were renovating the Gator Bowl. Florida came to Athens, and before the game, Spurrier, asked some SID like, "What's the most points anybody scored here?" Found out that nobody had ever. Found out nobody had ever scored 50 in Sanford Stadium, and said that's what we're going to do today. And I actually had somebody that responded to my tweet today and was like, "Oh, I was a student ball boy for UGA at the time, and I was on Florida's sideline that day, and their whole coaching staff was like gleefully talking about getting that record from the start of the third quarter on, basically. But they wanted that record. They wanted to score 50, and the score was 45-17." Late in the fourth quarter, and Spurrier ran a reverse pass with his backups in and set up a final touchdown. And so one of the backups that was in for Georgia at the time was a freshman safety named Kirby Smart. And pretty well publicized story about Spurrier hating Georgia because of how some of the games went when he was in college. And no one's ever really gone back and looked at the fact that like Kirby was kind of on the other end of Spurrier's anger, and how he took it out on the flip side. So now it feels like Georgia's kind of got the upper hand, and Kirby even wears a visor, right? Like in many ways, Kirby Smart is the Georgia football answer to Steve Spurrier, and in terms of success and just in terms of how he's dominated this rivalry, right? I mean, he lost his first season and then won since. He's not been able to put together a string of 7 in a row like Steve did, but last year I thought he actually kind of took his foot off the gas. Georgia, I think, maybe could have scored again in that game, and they didn't. So, I think him and Napier have this relationship that sort of supersedes either of their time at their current schools, being on the Alabama staff together. But like Kirby hated Dan Mullen. I can tell you that. Like, not hated, but Kirby thought that Dan Mullen was a clown, and Dan Mullen tried to poke Georgia, and he tried to, kind of negative recruit them on some things. And when Georgia beat them in 2021 in that game that was like 34-7 or whatever it was, Kirby said after the game, like, you can't out coach talent. And it was a shot at Dan being a lazy recruiter. And Dan got fired the next week. And I mean, like, one thing I failed to say in that little video is that the last 2 Florida coaches who have been fired the week after getting beat by Georgia. I don't think that happens to Billy this week. I think if he made it through Miami, it seems like they're in. I think Strickland knows that he's got to get fired if he fires another one. So there's interesting dynamics at play there that you're much more familiar with than I am. But at the end of the day, I do think you look at Kirby's behavior, and most games are just games, and most games before the postseason are games that are just designed to get better.
Yeah.
But in this game, even if Florida is maybe not, a 6-1 team or a 7-1 team coming into it, Georgia always puts their best foot forward for this game. They always try to get guys healthy, and they always run some things that they haven't all year. And I think that Kirby treats this game with the type of intensity that Spurrier did, and that's what Georgia people always wanted, was somebody that wanted to beat Florida as bad as Florida wanted to beat them. All
right, last one before I let you go. Do you have a pick in this one yet?
Yeah, I'm on the side of Georgia. I think this game is really hard to handicap because Lagway, I could see him make 2 hero throws a half that lead to points, and I could also see him not be able to kind of complete some short intermediate stuff and get into a spot where they're having a lot of 3 and outs, and Georgia kind of, this thing gets sideways on them. So I'm torn between which of those things will happen. But I'm going to go, right now I'm kind of in the range of like Georgia 34, Florida 21. I don't expect Georgia to cover. 21 points feels like a huge spread in this game to me. But I think Georgia, wins without it being too stressful in the last 10, 15 minutes of the game.
All right, Graham, thanks for coming on. Can you tell folks where they can find your work, where they can follow you on social?
Yeah, absolutely. I publish and write for a website called dogcentral.com. If you're a Georgia fan and you find this, any intel and deep dive analysis, we're your destination for it. And on Twitter, you can follow me at Graham Coffee DC.
All right, Graham, we appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Sorry for the technical issues.
No worries. You're all good. Talk to you later.
Yeah, have a good one.
All right, Gator fans, I'm going to go back to my keys to the game. Before we do, I want to give a shout out to Christian. He says, Gator Nation, this is Christian. How do these names sound? The Fighting Puppies from Athens, the Little Georgia Scrappy Doos, Florida State Cinnamon Rolls, the Garnet and Shame, Tennessee Home Depot Volunteers. All right, we appreciate the super chat. Okay, keys to the game. Started it right before Graham hopped on. Can DJ Lagway handle the pressure of this game? Can he minimize freshman mistakes? If you look at Georgia's previous games, they occasionally struggle with the deep ball. And the Gators need to capitalize on that. DJ Lagway's a little feast or famine when it comes there. It's either, a freaking 70-yard bomb for a touchdown or it's an interception, right? And Florida is going to need him to minimize those mistakes on Saturday because I do think as DJ goes, so will this game. Okay, second key. Can Florida's offensive line hold up against Georgia's D-line? Georgia's front seven is ferocious. This offensive line has done a much better job recently in protecting their quarterback. And, some of that I'm sure has to do with DJ's mobility, but they're going to have to hold up. This is going to be the best D-line that they have seen all season long. Other side of the ball, key number 3, can Florida's defense force Carson Beck to make mistakes? He has thrown a lot of interceptions recently. I think he's thrown 6 in the past 2 games. Can the Gators force more? And then if they do, can they get points off of those interceptions? Number 4, play calling. Can Napier avoid any momentum-killing calls? This is going to be a game that is going to have to be called next to perfect for the Gators to have a legitimate shot in it. And then number 5 is, I could probably just leave this on the list every single year. It's special teams. Florida's special teams, for the most part, have been really good this year until the Tennessee game when they weren't, right? We are going to need to play not good special teams, but great special teams. And you're going to make sure if you're going to win, you're going to have to limit mistakes there. Okay. So before we get to our prediction, I do want to give some love to Meldon Law. We love to shout them out because not only do they do a lot of great things for our channel, but they do a lot of awesome things for Gator Athletics. And now they're going to give back to you guys. Right now, you can click the link in the description of our video to enter to win tickets to the UF LSU game at the end of the year. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to buy anything. Just register there and you are set. We appreciate Meldon Law for their support and this giveaway that we're partnering with them on. And of course, if you're hurt or injured in a car accident, motorcycle accident, Uber, Lyft accident, whatever, give them a call. They have offices in Gainesville, Ocala, Lake City, and Fort Lauderdale. But make sure you enter this giveaway, okay? It's an awesome one. Why not win free tickets? Let me see if some of y'all's comments in there. I do think that Jason Marshall Jr. being out is a huge loss. I think Wilson being out is a huge loss. It's going to be interesting to see how Florida plays without them. All right, I'm about to give you my prediction, but before I do, I want to tell you something. You need to make sure you are subscribed to this channel. You have your notifications turned on because today I talked to a legendary coach from the Gators and a legendary coach from the Dogs, and both of those interviews are going to drop tomorrow. You are going to want to see who it is and hear what they had to say. All right, so my prediction, this might be the first time this has ever happened. I'll have to go back and look. I do think Georgia wins. I think it's a close one. I think it's 38-31. I think Florida shows a lot of things. I just think Georgia's talent is going to be apparent by the end of this one. I appreciate BetUS and Meldon Law for all of their support and all of you guys for tuning in. Thanks so much, and make sure you are subscribed so you see these videos tomorrow morning. You are not going to want to miss them. Go Gators.